I never expected my life to take such a bizarre turn, standing face to face with an alien, her tentacles swaying in the air like delicate vines, shimmering in the dim moonlight. My heart raced in my chest as I took in the sight of her, wondering if I was still dreaming or if some part of my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, this was real. Her name was Elira. At least that's what she told me when she first arrived, though it was hard to focus on anything as mundane as names when everything around me felt unreal. I had been out in the desert, a place I often went for solitude and reflection, when the sky split open with a roar. A flash of light followed by a deafening crash sent a tremor through the earth beneath my feet. The impact was so massive that it sent clouds of dust swirling into the air, but the true shock came when I made my way to the crater left behind. What I found wasn't debris or wreckage. Instead, it was a figure, one unlike anything I had ever seen before. She stood in the center of the massive crater, her alien ship in ruins behind her, but she seemed completely unscathed. Her skin shimmered with a soft, iridescent glow, and her silhouette was framed by the faintest outline of the wreckage. I remember feeling more curious than fearful. Maybe it was the sheer awe of her appearance, or maybe it was the sense that my ordinary life was about to collide with something extraordinary. Her eyes locked with mine, and for a moment I could have sworn she saw right through me, into the very core of who I was. I couldn't look away. And then, the silence. It was overwhelming, like the whole world had paused just for us. I couldn't think of anything to say. My mind raced for words, something to bridge the vast distance between us, but nothing seemed right. What could you say to an alien who had just crash-landed on your planet? How do you greet someone who isn't human? Finally, I blurted out the first thing that came to my mind, hoping it might break the tension. Your tentacles look great today. It was a joke. Or at least I thought it was. But the words hung in the air like a thick fog, awkward and out of place. I was expecting her to laugh, or at the very least give me an odd look before brushing me off. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her eyes narrowing just slightly, as if trying to decipher whether I was mocking her or if there was something deeper to my words. I swallowed hard. Was it the wrong thing to say? I had no idea what the right thing even was. But I had to fill the silence. The seconds stretched on longer than they should have. Her gaze intensified, piercing, searching me as though she were reading my soul. Then she spoke, and her voice was soft. Softer than I had imagined, but there was an edge to it that sent a shiver down my spine. "You think they look great?" she asked, her tone both curious and dangerous. "You have no idea what they mean?" I blinked, unsure of how to respond. The question seemed so simple on the surface, but her words carried a weight that I couldn't quite grasp. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elira took a slow step forward, and her eyes softened just slightly. But there was something about the way she moved that told me there was far more to her than met the eye. She wasn't here just for a casual conversation. Whatever her mission was, it was serious, and perhaps far darker than I could ever imagine. "I did not come here to be admired for my tentacles," she said softly. "I came here for something much more important." Her words sent a chill through me. Suddenly, the atmosphere around us seemed to shift. It wasn't just the desert air anymore. It felt like the very air between us was charged with something electric. I could sense that she wasn't just some lost traveler or a curious alien. Her presence exuded power, and whatever it was that had brought her here, it wasn't random. I took a step closer, feeling an urge to understand what she meant, to know why she had come. "What is it? What do you need?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, a fleeting moment that told me she wasn't just an alien with superior technology. She was someone who had been through something, someone who had a story that needed to be told, and that story I was about to become a part of, whether I was ready for it or not. "I'm not here to explain myself, human," she said, almost like a whisper in the wind. But you will come to understand. You will play a role in something far greater than either of us can imagine." Her words were cryptic, yet filled with a certainty that sent my mind spinning. There was no going back now. The silence that followed Elira's words was almost deafening. I stood there, rooted to the spot, trying to digest what she had just said. The weight of her statement lingered in the air, pressing down on me like a physical force. There was so much hidden in her words, so much that I couldn't begin to fathom. Her alien presence felt both enchanting and terrifying at the same time. I'd always thought I was prepared for the unknown. After all, I'd spent years studying the stars, the possibilities of life beyond Earth. But this, standing before her, was nothing like I had imagined. This wasn't the curiosity of an extraterrestrial visitor or the excitement of discovery. This was something deeper, something foreboding. "Role in something far greater," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "What do you mean by that?" Elira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she turned her gaze towards the wreckage of her ship, still smoking softly in the distance, its once glowing hull now twisted and blackened. There was a sadness in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before, something raw and untold. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, carried on the desert wind. "My people, they sent me here to find something, to retrieve something, an object of great importance. But what I found was far more than I was prepared for." I followed her gaze, trying to understand the depth of what she was feeling. She seemed so powerful, so confident in her presence. Yet, in that moment, she appeared almost fragile, as if the weight of her mission was too much to bear alone. "What did you find?" I asked, my voice cautious but filled with curiosity. Elira paused, her tentacles flickering as if alive, responding to a distant signal I couldn't comprehend. "I found you," she said softly, turning back to me, her eyes locked onto mine. "And I never expected this. I never expected to find someone like you, someone who could change everything." I felt a chill run down my spine. My body tensed involuntarily. "What do you mean? What's so special about me?" Elira's expression softened for just a moment, but the weight of her words carried an unspoken truth that I wasn't yet ready to face. She took a step closer, and I noticed how her movements were almost graceful, like she was used to gliding through unknown worlds, adapting to the unknown. "It's not about what you are," she said, her voice now firm, like steel, beneath silk. "It's about who you're going to become." I frowned, unsure of what she meant. "Who I'm going to become? I'm just a guy, nothing special." She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as if she were reading me like an open book. "You are far more than you think. Far more than even you can understand." I took a step back, trying to process the weight of her words. The tension between us thickened, and the air around us seemed to grow heavier, laden with secrets I couldn't even begin to imagine. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why do you think I can help you?" Elira's gaze seemed to pierce through me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something else, something darker. "Because, Edward, you are the key. You're the one who can stop everything from falling apart." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just here for a casual conversation or a random encounter. No, she was here because I was involved in something much larger than I could have ever imagined. Her arrival, her words, her very presence, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. My life, as I knew it, was about to change forever. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could form another word, Elira's eyes grew distant again, as if someone, had interrupted our moment. Her attention snapped back to the sky, her face growing tense. "They're coming," she muttered, her tone cold and calculating. "I can feel them." "Who's coming?" I asked, my heart racing once again. Elira's eyes locked onto mine, and in that brief moment, I saw something in her that I hadn't seen before. Fear. Fear, not for herself, but for something greater than her. Something I had yet to understand. "I can't explain everything to you now," she said, her voice more urgent than before. "But I need you to trust me. There's no time." Suddenly, the sky above us darkened, and a strange hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground beneath us. I looked up, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. A fleet of ships, sleek, black, and ominous, was descending from the sky. They glided smoothly, their forms like shadows against the stars, moving with an elegance that sent chills down my spine. Elira stepped forward, her expression hardening. "They found me." I took a step back, my heart racing. "Who are they?" "The ones who will stop at nothing to get what they want," Elira said coldly, her tone carrying a finality I wasn't prepared for. "And they'll destroy anyone who stands in their way." The moment felt like it had frozen in time. The alien ships hovered above us, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The world felt suddenly small, fragile, and I realized, with a growing sense of dread, that I was standing on the precipice of something much larger than myself. The air crackled with a sense of urgency. The alien ships hovered silently overhead, their dark silhouettes casting long shadows across the barren desert landscape. A low, ominous hum resonated from them, vibrating through the ground beneath, our feet. Elira's posture had changed, her usual graceful confidence now replaced with an edge of readiness, as if she were preparing for something inevitable. I stood frozen, my mind racing, struggling to process what was happening. The sky above had been clear moments ago, yet now it felt suffocating, as though the heavens themselves were closing in on us. I looked to Elira, hoping for some explanation, some clue about what to do next. "They know where I am," Elira said, her voice firm but tinged with something I hadn't heard before. Fear. Not for herself, but for what was at stake. "They'll come down, and they'll take me, Edward, and when they do, everything will fall apart." "Who are they?" I asked, my voice betraying the anxiety I was trying to suppress. "What do they want?" Elira took a deep breath, her tentacles twitching as if sensing something in the air. She was calm on the surface, but there was a storm raging behind her eyes. "They're the ones who control everything, the ones who rule my world and many others. If they find me, they'll destroy everything we've worked for. The whole galaxy will fall into chaos." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I had no idea what kind of power this mysterious group wielded, but I could sense its depth. The stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. My involvement in this, whatever this was, suddenly felt like a trap. A trap I was already too deep into to escape. "I'm not from your world, Elira," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what's going on or what you've been through, but if these people are as dangerous as you say, then what are we supposed to do?" For a moment, Elira seemed lost in thought, her gaze drifting upward to the descending ships. Her eyes flickered with something, determination maybe, before she turned back to me, her voice softer but resolute. "You're more than you realize, Edward. I never thought you would be caught in this. But now, there's no turning back." I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but before I could speak, a flash of bright light erupted from one of the ships above. A beam of energy shot down, blasting the ground just meters away from us. The force of the explosion sent a shockwave through the air, knocking me off my feet. I hit the ground hard, my ears ringing, my vision blurred from the force. When I regained my bearings, I looked up to see Elira standing tall, her form glowing faintly as she focused on the ship above. She wasn't fazed by the attack. Her body shimmered with an energy I hadn't seen before, as if she were drawing power from somewhere deep within herself. "They've arrived," she said, her voice unwavering. "This is it." The ground beneath us trembled again, and I looked to the sky, my heart pounding in my chest. The ships had landed, their engines whirring to a stop as figures began to emerge from their sleek black forms. They were tall, almost humanoid in shape, but their features were twisted, almost monstrous in their appearance. Their skin was a pale, sickly color, and their eyes glowed with an eerie green light. The air felt thick with tension, and I could see the alien soldiers moving toward us, their bodies rippling with strange energy. They were not just here to capture Elira, they were here to annihilate anyone who stood in their way. "We need to move," Elira said urgently, her voice low and controlled. "They're not just here for me anymore. They'll kill us both if we don't act fast." I barely had time to process her words before she grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the wreckage of her ship. My legs moved almost instinctively, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't fully comprehend. I had never imagined I'd be caught in the middle of an intergalactic conflict, let alone one where the fate of entire worlds was at stake. Elira's ship, what remained of it, was still intact, though it was severely damaged. As we neared it, she paused, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The alien soldiers were closing in, but she seemed to be calculating her next move. She wasn't running, she was planning. "Do you trust me, Edward?" Elira asked, her voice steady, but the weight of her question hung heavily in the air. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I have no idea what's going on, but I trust you." She nodded, her eyes flickering with a hint of approval. "Good, because I'm about to make sure we're not. They're next targets, but you need to stay close and don't make a sound." Without waiting for a response, Elira pressed a small device on her wrist. The sound of a soft mechanical whirring filled the air, and suddenly, a holographic shield enveloped us. The translucent energy field hummed around us, bending light and rendering us nearly invisible to anyone looking our way. The soldiers continued their advance, unaware of our presence. Elira's plan was working, but for how long? "We have to get to the transport pod," Elira whispered urgently, her eyes scanning the area. "Once we're there, we can get off this planet and find safety." I nodded, my mind still reeling. Whatever Elira was planning, I knew that this was only the beginning. The danger was far from over, and the only way forward was into the unknown. As we moved, I could hear the alien soldiers talking among themselves, their guttural voices growing louder with each passing moment. I had no idea where we were heading, but I followed Elira's lead, trusting that she knew what she was doing. "Just keep moving," she said, her voice steady. "We can't afford to get caught." As we approached the transport pod, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Despite the chaos around us, despite the uncertainty of everything that was happening, there was something in Elira's presence that anchored me. I didn't know why she had come to Earth or why she had dragged me into this conflict, but one thing was clear. Our destinies were now bound together, and I had no idea where that path would lead. But I knew one thing for certain. My life would never be the same again. We reached the transport pod, its sleek, metallic exterior gleaming faintly under the dim desert sky. It looked like something out of a science fiction film, far beyond anything I had ever imagined, and certainly beyond any technology I had seen on Earth. The pod was small, compact, yet it exuded an undeniable power, humming quietly as Elira approached it with a sense of purpose. I barely had time to process the incredible reality of what was happening. My entire world had been turned upside down, and now I was being swept into a conflict that spanned beyond the stars. Elira moved swiftly, her tentacles undulating as she worked her way to the pod's control panel. She seemed calm, too calm for the chaos we had just narrowly escaped, and it only made me more uneasy. "We need to move. Fast," she said, her voice low and urgent, her eyes scanning the surrounding desert. I could hear the sound of approaching footsteps. The alien soldiers were getting closer, and I knew that the shield would only hold up for so long. The tension was suffocating. The desert, which had once felt so vast and silent, now felt like a prison closing in on us. There was no way out, unless we reached the pod and got off this planet, but I could sense the enemy closing in. Elira didn't waste a second. With practiced ease, she activated the pod's door, and it opened with a soft hiss. Without saying another word, she ushered me inside. The interior was even more advanced than the outside, with panels that glowed faintly and instruments I couldn't begin to understand. The cockpit was small, just enough for the two of us to fit, But there was no time to marvel at the technology. I stepped inside, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. It felt like a blur, a crash landing, an alien encounter, and now a flight into the unknown. My entire life had just taken a sharp turn, and I had no idea what awaited us on the other side of whatever Elira was running from. Once we were inside, Elira closed the hatch, sealing us off from the world outside. She quickly strapped herself into the pilot's seat, her movements swift and efficient. I followed her lead, strapping myself in as well, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hold on," Elira said, her eyes fixed on the control panel. "This is going to get rough." I barely had time to react before the pod lifted off the ground, its engines humming to life with a powerful surge of energy. The world outside the window blurred as we shot into the air, faster than anything I had ever experienced. The desert, once vast and quiet, quickly became a mere speck beneath us as the pod accelerated, climbing higher and higher into the sky. But I could see the alien ships following us. They weren't giving up that easily. They were fast, too fast, and their pursuit was relentless. They had the technology to catch us, and they were closing the gap. "We need to go faster," I said, my voice strained. I was struggling to keep my cool, but the truth was that I was terrified. I had no idea what these alien pursuers were capable of, but one thing was clear: they weren't going to stop until they had us. "I'm already pushing this thing to its limits," Elira responded, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed a hint of concern. "But they won't stop. They never do." A loud alarm sounded inside the pod, and I turned toward the control panel where a red light was flashing. The pursuing ships were locking onto us, their weapons charging up. "They're targeting us!" I shouted, my panic rising. "I know," Elira replied, her voice calm despite the danger. "They'll fire soon. We need to evade them." I watched in awe as Elira's hands danced across the control panel, inputting commands with speed and precision. The pod jolted as it suddenly veered to the left, narrowly dodging a beam of energy that shot past us, its destructive force ripping through the atmosphere. I held my breath as we continued to spiral through the air, diving and weaving in a desperate attempt to shake the pursuers. I could hear the hum of the alien ships behind us, getting closer with each passing second. The world outside the pod was nothing but a blur of lights and motion as Elira pushed the pod to its limits, every turn more desperate than the last. "You can't outrun them forever," I said, my voice laced with panic. "What happens if they catch us?" Elira's gaze flickered to me, her face a mask of determination. "We can't let them catch us. I'll do everything in my power to keep them off our trail, but we need to buy more time." I didn't fully understand what she meant by that, but I trusted her. I didn't have a choice. Whatever danger lay ahead, whatever mission had brought Elira to Earth, I was now a part of it. We were in this together, whether I was ready for it or not. The ships behind us fired again, this time with a more concentrated blast. The pod shuddered violently, and I felt my stomach drop as we plummeted for a moment, before Elira pulled us back into a sharp ascent. The sound of explosions filled the air, and I had to brace myself as the pod rattled under the force of the impact. "Hold on!" Elira shouted as she punched in a series of commands. I barely had time to process what was happening before the pod dipped into a high-speed dive, a move so sharp and dangerous that I thought for a moment we might crash. But Elira's focus never wavered, and in that moment, I realized just how skilled she was. The alien ships continued to follow, their energy blasts lighting up the sky, but Elira's evasive maneuvers were swift and calculated. For the first time since I had met her, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could escape this. But the question lingered. How much longer could we keep running? The pod jolted again as another blast from the alien ships narrowly missed us. My heart raced as the world outside became a blur of flashing lights and colors. Elira's hands were a blur of motion on the controls, her focus unwavering despite the chaos surrounding us. I had no idea how she was keeping it together, how she was keeping us together, but I wasn't about to question it. The air was thick with tension. We were running out of time. I could see the alien ships gaining on us in the reflection of the pod's screens. No matter how fast we went, they seemed to be just a step behind. It felt like we were caught in a never-ending chase through the stars, and I had no idea how it would end. "Elira, how much farther?" I asked, my voice tight with anxiety. "Where are we going? What's the plan?" She didn't answer immediately, her eyes scanning the controls with intense concentration. She was thinking, processing, calculating every move. I couldn't even begin to understand what was going on in her mind, but I could see the weight of it all in her expression. "We're not safe yet," she finally said, her voice cool but tinged with urgency. "I'm taking us to a place where they can't track us, but it's going to take everything I have to get us there." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I fully understood what she meant. Elira's hands moved over the console, her fingers pressing buttons with practiced precision. The ship hummed beneath us, the engine straining as she pushed it to its limits. Suddenly, the pod dipped violently, throwing me against my seat. I gasped as the force of the movement nearly knocked the breath out of me. The air outside the pod seemed to shimmer, distorting like a heat wave as we passed through some sort of energy barrier. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to make sense of what was happening. "What's happening? Where are we going?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "This is a rift," Elira explained quickly, her voice calm despite the intensity of the moment. "A space-time rift. It's the only way to lose them. It's unstable, but it's our best shot." My mind raced, trying to process her words. A rift? A space-time rift? Was this even real? I could feel the energy around us shift, vibrating through my body as we flew through the rift. The stars, outside, twisted into strange, impossible shapes, warping like liquid in a storm. I didn't know where we were or where we were going, but it felt like we were in another dimension altogether. I gripped the sides of my seat, trying to steady myself as the pod continued its frantic journey. The ship groaned under the pressure of the rift, the lights flickering as we cut through the fabric of space itself. It felt like we were flying through a tunnel of light and shadow, where time itself was bending and breaking. Elira's face was set in a mask of determination, but there was something in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, something that resembled doubt. It was brief, just a flicker, but it was enough to make me question everything. I had no idea where we were going. I had no idea what Elira was planning, but I trusted her. I had to. Suddenly, a violent jolt sent me crashing back into my seat. The ship shook violently, the sound of metal groaning and straining filling the cabin. I saw Elira's hands fly over the controls, her movements erratic as the ship spiraled through the rift. "We're losing power," Elira shouted, her voice now laced with panic. "It's unstable." I felt the ship lurch again, and this time, I thought we might crash. My stomach flipped as the pod hurtled through space, the rift around us flashing with violent streaks of light. I had no idea how much longer we could survive this. "Elira, what do we do?" I shouted, barely able to hear myself over the roar of the ship's engines. "Hold on," she yelled back. "I'm going to stabilize the pod." But it was too late. The rift around us started to collapse, the energy field flickering like a dying flame. I could feel the pod trembling, the vibrations growing stronger as the fabric of space around us began to tear. There was no time to escape. We were caught in the rift, and it was pulling us in faster than we could fight it. I looked at Elira, and in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before, a glimpse of fear. It was fleeting, but it was there. The alien who had once seemed so invincible, so in control, was no longer the calm and collected figure I had grown to trust. "Hold on," Elira shouted again, her voice filled with desperation, and then everything went dark. The silence between us felt heavy, as if we were both waiting for something we couldn't name. The pod hummed gently as we continued our journey through the vastness of this new dimension, the stars outside shifting as if they were watching, us waiting. Elira had been quiet for the past few minutes, her focus on the control panel in front of her, fingers dancing across the glowing interface with ease. But I could sense the tension in her. Something was weighing heavily on her mind, something I still didn't fully understand. I had always thought that my life was ordinary, but now, standing beside an alien, traveling through dimensions I never imagined existed, I realized how little I truly knew about the universe, and how much more there was to learn. "We're getting closer," Alira said, her voice breaking the silence, "to the place where I can contact the others. I just need a few moments to—" Her words were cut off by a sudden flash of light in the distance. My heart skipped a beat as I turned to look out the pod's window. The light was growing brighter, and I could see the shape of something massive ahead, something that seemed to loom larger with every passing second. "What is that?" I asked, my voice filled with wonder and fear. Alira's eyes narrowed as she stared at the glowing object ahead. That's the Nexus." "The Nexus?" I repeated, confused. "What's the Nexus?" Alira hesitated for a moment, her fingers stilling on the control panel as she looked at me. "The Nexus is a place of power. It's a crossroads between different dimensions, a hub for civilizations from all over the galaxy. It's a place where knowledge, technology, and power converge." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "And what does it have to do with us?" She turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "It's the key to understanding everything, to understanding why I'm being hunted, why they want me, and why you're involved in this." I was about to ask more, but before I could speak, the pod shook violently, throwing me back in my seat. The alarm on the control panel blared, and I saw that the Nexus was now surrounded by several ships, massive, imposing vessels that were unlike anything I had seen before. Their shapes were sleek, almost like living creatures, their dark hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. Alira's eyes flashed with urgency. "They've found us!" I felt the cold grip of fear tighten around my chest. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The ones who control everything," Alira replied grimly, her face hardening. "The ones who have been hunting me, the ones who are behind the destruction of my world." I looked out the window again, trying to process what was happening. The ships were getting closer, their engines emitting a low hum that vibrated through the pod. There was no escaping them now. They were here, and they weren't here for a peaceful visit. "What do we do?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Alira's hand moved to the controls again, but this time her movements were slower, more deliberate. She wasn't panicking. She had a plan. I hoped. "I'm going to take us inside the Nexus," she said. "It's the only place they can't track us, but once we're in, there's no turning back. We'll be in their territory." The tension in the air thickened, and I could feel the weight of her words. The Nexus was their territory? The ones who were chasing us? What kind of place was this? I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could ask, the pod lurched forward, hurtling toward the glowing shape of the Nexus. The ships surrounding it seemed to draw closer, but Alira's hands were steady on the controls as she pushed the pod into high-speed flight. "Hold on," Alira said, her voice sharp. "This is going to get rough." We plunged into the Nexus at breakneck speed, the stars around us blurring into streaks of light. The walls of the Nexus seemed to open up before us, a massive energy field that pulsed with power. The entire dimension seemed to shimmer, bending around us like a living entity. As we entered the heart of the Nexus, I felt a shift in the air. The energy inside the Nexus was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was both overwhelming and intoxicating, like a force that was both ancient and infinite. And then, something unexpected happened. A massive shape emerged from the swirling energy ahead, blocking our path. It was enormous, larger than any ship I had ever seen, and it seemed to be made of pure energy, its form constantly shifting and changing. It looked alive, and for a moment, I wondered if we had just entered the lair of some interdimensional creature. Alira cursed under her breath. "We've been detected. The Nexus isn't a safe place anymore." I turned to her, my heart racing. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, her voice low and filled with a steely determination, "that we're about to face whatever they've been preparing for us." The massive energy entity before us shifted, its form darkening, and I could feel the intensity of the power emanating from it. It wasn't just blocking our path, it was hunting us. Stay close, Edward, Alira said. We're not out of danger yet. This is just the beginning. The pod shook again, and I braced myself for whatever came next. We had entered the heart of the Nexus, and now we were going to learn the truth behind everything. The truth about why Alira had come to Earth, and why she had brought me into this fight. The answers, I realized, were just beyond our reach. The hum of the pod's engines filled the air, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. I glanced at Alira, whose face was set in a mask of concentration as she navigated through the pulsating energy of the Nexus. The massive energy entity in front of us was now in full pursuit, its form ever shifting, growing more menacing with every passing second. My heart raced, and I could feel the sweat on my brow as the ship jerked and jolted with every evasive maneuver Alira executed. It felt like we were running from some primal force, one that wouldn't stop until it had us. But even as the fear gripped me, there was something else, something deeper, something that made me realize this wasn't just a chase. This was the final confrontation, the moment where everything would change. We can't outrun it forever, I said, my voice tight with urgency. What are we going to do? Alira's eyes flickered toward me, her expression grim. We don't need to outrun it. We need to face it. I stared at her, confusion clouding my mind. Face it? How? Trust me, she said, her voice calm but firm. This is the only way. I didn't understand, but I didn't question her. I had learned to trust her, even if I still didn't fully comprehend the depth of the situation. The energy entity loomed ever closer, its tendrils of light reaching out like dark fingers trying to grasp hold of us. Alira's hands flew across the controls once more, her fingers tapping out a rapid sequence of commands. I could feel the pod's energy shifting, a strange pulse running through it. The ship seemed to resonate with the energy of the Nexus itself, as if it was syncing with the very fabric of this dimension. Then, in a sudden movement, Alira slammed a large red button on the console, and the pod lurched forward, breaking through the force field in front of us. A brilliant flash of light exploded outward, blinding me for a moment, and when the light faded, I could see the energy entity in front of us, its form now distorted and flickering, as though it was losing coherence. Now! Alira shouted, her voice filled with a sudden ferocity. I understood what she meant. It wasn't just about evading the entity, it was about disrupting its power. We had to destroy it, or at least destabilize it long enough to get away. And in that moment, I realized something. Alira wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for something far greater. She was fighting for the future. I watched as Alira pressed another series of buttons, her face tense, her eyes narrowed with focus. The pod's engines roared as they surged with energy, and the entire vessel seemed to vibrate with power. We were heading straight toward the entity. Hold on tight, Alira barked, and I barely had time to brace myself before we collided with the energy entity. The impact was beyond anything I could have imagined. It felt like the universe itself was tearing apart around us. The pod shook violently, and for a moment, I thought we might be ripped apart by the force. But Alira's steady hands kept us on course. The pod surged forward, the energy of the Nexus swirling around us, reacting to the chaotic disturbance we had just caused. I watched in awe as the energy entity began to unravel. Its form flickered, its tendrils shrinking and pulsing erratically. It was like watching a living thing unraveling, its core destabilizing with every passing second. We're not out of it yet, Alira shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the pod's engines. We need to get to the exit before it collapses completely. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. The entire Nexus was destabilizing, the energy around us flickering like a dying flame. We had only moments before everything collapsed into chaos. Alira's hands flew across the controls once more, and the pod shot forward, speeding through the twisting corridors of the Nexus. It was like we were flying through a labyrinth, the walls of the dimension warping and shifting with every turn. The ship's engines screamed as they fought against the collapsing forces around us. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of us. A glowing exit, a rift in the fabric of space and time, offering the only chance for escape. But the entity was right behind us, its form now more frantic and unstable than ever. We had no time left. "Now!" Elira shouted, her voice filled with desperation. I held my breath as the pod shot through the rift, the energy of the Nexus colliding. Behind us in a final blinding explosion, the shockwave rocked the pod, and for a moment, I thought we would be torn apart. But we pushed forward, through the rift, into the unknown. The light faded, and the roar of the Nexus behind us fell silent. We had made it. We were free. For a moment, everything was still. I looked out the window, and for the first time since I had met Elira, I saw the stars in a new light. They weren't just distant points of light, they were possibilities. They were a future that we could shape. Elira exhaled slowly, her grip loosening on the controls. "We made it," she said, her voice quiet, but filled with relief. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "But where are we now?" Elira turned to me, her eyes softening for the first time. "We're exactly where we need to be," she said, "and we're not alone." I glanced at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "We have allies," Elira said, her voice filled with a quiet strength. "And we're going to need all the help we can get. The real fight is just beginning." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink in. We had escaped the immediate danger, but the war was far from over. Whatever came next, I knew one thing. For sure, I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I was a part of this, and together, Elira and I would face whatever the universe had in store.